Marcy, Skylight, Gray, Cliff, and Redfield done. Now the long walk back to the lodge.
3:55 a.m., just signed in. Santanoni Range, let's go.
The wind is whipping here in the Seward Range today.
Just finished the Macomb slide and my legs are on fire.
Well, I fell victim to the floating logs again.
Made it to the top of East Dix, peak number 3 of 5 for today here in the
Walking
Dix
along
Range.
Avalanche Pass.
On top of Rocky Peak Bridge, it's like a hurricane up here. Rain and wind here on Tabletop. Whiteface, number 6.
Muddy day here on Street and Nye for number 7 and 8.
Sunny and blue on Haystack. Algonquin, up in the clouds, number 18.
Gothic's number 22. Panther, number 38. Allen, number 45.
7:12 a.m., big slide, Adirondack 46er.
You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast. May 9th, 2018. Out of pure coincidence and for the first time ever, I was working in the Adirondacks this week. I work in the film and television industry, and I'm based out of New York City for work, where I work on TV series and movies in the sound department, recording what the actors are saying. But I live full-time in the Adirondacks, so needless to say, I do a lot of traveling for work, driving up and down I-87, and then coming home on the weekends and always taking time off between jobs. And this week, however, I was for the first time ever boom operating on some Netflix movie that happened to be shooting for a week in Old Forge, the hub of the Western Adirondacks. And I was stoked to drive to work from my own house in the morning before work. Like a normal person, where you leave from your house, go to work, and go home, like everyone else. An experience that I haven't had in almost a decade. Crazy, right? But I left my house and started driving west on Route 3, going through Tupper Lake, then over to Long Lake, continuing west through parts of the Adirondack Park that I've been wanting to visit but haven't yet. It was a bluebird day, making for an amazing drive through the Adirondacks as I came to Blue Mountain Lake, Indian Lake, Eagle Bay, Inlet, and eventually Old Forge. Since I was going to be working here for a few days, I brought all my hiking gear with me because I planned to hike the Fulton Chain Trifecta during my stay in the beautiful town of Old Forge. Rocky Mountain, Black Bear Mountain, and Bald Mountain make up this great Adirondack hiking challenge. So it was time to hike. It was a Thursday morning, though I only finished working Wednesday night at 4:30 a.m., but I woke up at the crew hotel around 10 a.m. because I can't sleep past 10 a.m. no matter when I go to bed. My body just won't have it. It won't let me sleep later than that. So I woke up, feeling terrible, of course. I got dressed and headed out the door to do some hiking. There was no way I was going to pass up being in the Western ADK on a sunny day and not hit the trail. So I got in my van and took a right out of the hotel parking lot, down Route 28 towards Inlet and Eagle Bay. Roughly 10 miles to the parking lot for both Rocky and Black Bear Mountains, passing the trailhead for Bald Mountain on the way. My goal for today was to complete all 3 mountains of the challenge before having to get into the crew van back at the hotel for work at 3:30 p.m. So time was of the essence. My plan for today was to start with the 1-mile round trip up Rocky Mountain first, then walk across the parking lot to tackle the largest peak of the challenge, Black Bear Mountain, and finally head back towards the hotel, stopping off for a quick trip up the 2-mile round trip Bald Mountain to the Adirondack Fire Tower that awaits at the summit. The clock was ticking, but I was determined to get all 3 in before another long night of swinging around a microphone on the end of a boom pole. Since I was in a hotel and my pack was in my car, I didn't have much for food, and I figured I'd fill up my water bladder and grab a few snacks at a donut shop I remember passing the day before when I got to the hotel. So while driving down Route 28, I came to the donut shop. Closed. Great. It turns out most businesses here in Old Forge aren't open for the season yet, or they're opening this very week, one or the other. And the donut shop, however, was closed. So I thought, okay, maybe there's a gas station before the trailhead. Nope. No gas station on the way. Then I arrived at the trailhead. It was 11:20 a.m. at this point, 4 hours until I need to leave for work. Luckily, I found a Snickers bar in my backpack from a previous hike, and I drove that into me. A very nutritious pre-hike breakfast, am I right? I had no other food and no water, but I thought, I often train early in the morning at the gym on minimal food and water, so I'll be fine. So I signed into Rocky Mountain at 11:25 a.m., and off I went. This is a short trail at only 0.5 miles each way with 433 feet of elevation gain. But as these shorty trails tend to go, they just go right up from the start, and this was no exception. Made it up one of the steeper sections here on Rocky. Now I'm on a little bit of flat section, which is nice, considering it doesn't really let up for the first good portion of this small 0.5 mile each way hike. Whew, what a way to wake up. The trail is well defined and marked as I went from yellow trail marker to yellow trail marker, making my way through the very rocky, root-covered trail. This mountain has a good mix of hardwoods and spruces and pine trees on your way up. The climbing's pretty consistent all the way up, mostly rock hopping with medium-sized boulders lining a good portion of this wide dirt trail, walking through the leaves and stepping on large exposed roots constantly. For being a short trail, it will definitely get your heart pumping, which was a nice start to my day. After the first portion of climbing, I came to a small meadow clearing of sorts that was a nice spot to catch my breath for a moment before seeing more climbing up ahead in my future. On we went. On this flatter stretch, I passed a mother and her presumably young son, probably 4 years old, coming down the trail. I said hello and continued past them, climbing up the final push to the summit, which is a nice little slab sidewalk of sorts going to the top before coming out onto the very spacious, very open rocky ledge summit, overlooking tons of lakes down below. I'm making my way up this final push, up these slabs here on Rocky Mountain, overlooking some beautiful lakes, sun shining, a little bit of clouds in the sky, but lots of blue as well. Nice temperature. It's about mid-50s, which is great. Yeah, the final push to the summit has me walking up a lot of slab. Nice and gradual. Definitely here at the summit. Took about 11:24 to 11:40. All right, about 16 minutes. Not bad. Wow. This is very cool. Very flat up top. Very nice size summit with boulders overlooking what I imagine is Old Forge and Inlet. And I'm not sure exactly which lake, actually lakes. So this is definitely different and very cool. I'm into it. Rocky Mountain, standing 2,207 feet above sea level for Fulton Chain Trifecta number 1 of 3. The summit is amazing, and for a small, quick hike, it has a major payoff up top with a big rocky summit overlooking Fourth Lake and the surrounding lakes along with other smaller mountains in the area. I summited at 11:41 a.m., totaling 16 minutes on this 0.5 mile, steeper for a short trail hike today. Both of the other mountains have great summits as well, but I think this was probably my favorite on the day. Probably because of the views of the lake, which you don't really get much in the high peaks region where I do most of my hiking. It was awesome. While I was standing up there taking in the big sunny views, I grabbed my bladder hose to take a sip of some water, since my heart was beating nicely at this point. And then the disappointment set in as I remembered, oh yeah, you don't have any water. Definitely would have loved a nice swig of some H2O at this point. But oh well, I'm fine. Onward down the trail, there's 2 more mountains to summit and I have no time to spare today. I basically ran down the trail to buy some time here because I wanted to be signed in and hiking on Black Bear before noon. Since I had originally planned to start hiking today at noon, but thanks to not being able to sleep and getting up earlier than I planned, I thought it would be pretty sweet if I was already on my second mountain by the original noon start time. So I cruised down the mountain, which is fast, and today was nice and dry, down the dirt trail, trying not to trip on the giant roots and medium-sized rocks all around it. Just before a little slab climb down, I passed the mother and her little boy again. The little guy seemed to be doing very well on the trail today. I love seeing little kids out hiking. So I skirted around them and continued hiking, and before I knew it, I was back at the trailhead and in the parking lot. 11:56 a.m., 3.5 hours until work. Without skipping a beat, I immediately walked down the parking lot along Route 28 as cars whipped by one after the other, passing a group of 2 guys and a girl at their car getting ready to hike before coming to the sign for Black Bear Mountain. So I took the left back into the woods and signed in at 11:59. Right on schedule. All right, here we are at the Black Bear Mountain Trail. to sign in. There's the southerly approach, which is the yellow trail, then the blue trail, which is 1.9 miles, according to the sign here at the sign-in. And the northernly approach, yellow trail, which is 2.2 miles. So I'll probably end up going yellow to blue and then loop back down the other way, making for a nice loop trail today as I sign in. Black Bear is the longest trail of the challenge, with a roughly 4.7 mile loop trail totaling around 760 feet of elevation gain. The first 0.7 miles of the trail, however, is a flat approach marked with yellow trail markers before the trail ultimately splits, with the left going up the longer, more gradual 3.1 mile ascent, and the right trail being the steeper 1.9 mile ascent to the summit. Around 10 minutes or so into the approach down this wide, leaf-covered trail with patchy sections of wet mud, which I walked straight through like a champion, of course, I heard an amazing sound. That's the sound of a nice stream flowing about 15 feet left of the trail. Yes. Now I could pump some water into my bladder, and the anxiety I had about not having any water with me would be gone. There was even a little moment where I said, do I want to stop and take the time to pump water? I mean, I'm on a time crunch today. But I did, and it was worth the 10-minute break to pump and have some water despite the time crunch. So I walked off the trail, crunching my way through the leaves over to the stream, probably 5 feet wide, where I straddled a couple of rocks and pumped water into my bladder with my very small, very low-profile water pump. It's about the size of a fist, so it's great for hiking. Just sitting here at the river, pumping some water, putting it back into my backpack. So now I have some water, and now I'm not as stressed out as I was. Hopefully you guys couldn't tell as you listen. But yeah, I didn't have any water for that first hike. And now I have a good 1.5 liters. So, of that fresh Adirondack river water. All right. Pumping complete. Time to walk back to the trail over here. Now that I have 1.5 liters of water in my bladder. And it is cold, fresh mountain water. It is tasty. That is good. That is good. I filled my 3-liter bladder about 2/3 of the way and knew that would be plenty for the day. Then I made my way back to the trail and carried on the 0.7 mile approach towards the trail split. The final 100 yards or so to the split was one super long stretch of wet, slushy, almost swampy mud. A very long stretch of it in particular. One of those deeper mud puddle type areas. You know, like when you're a kid playing that game we all used to play where the floor is hot lava. I hopped from rock to rock, branch to branch, as I did my best to avoid stepping straight in this deeper, thicker mud as the trail gradually climbs up ever so slightly over this 100 yards. Then I came to the trail split. My plan was to go up the short, steep trail and loop out via the other trail, unless time was really not on my side, in which case I'd come back down the steeper, shorter mileage trail instead. So I went right, up the shorter trail. The split makes it seem like the steeper section is going to be steep, because right from the start it comically climbs right up, while the long gradual trail to the left just continues flat through the woods, making me think, that other trail seems a lot easier. Oh well, too late now. So I continued winding my way through the forest along the steeper trail, which after an initial climb levels off pretty nicely anyways. The trail overall is still a nice dirt trail, well-defined and easy to follow, with some gradual elevation gains from time to time, but more winding and waving through the woods in an enjoyable fashion. Some areas of blowdown mixed in with smaller climbs that weren't steep like I imagined them to be, but this stretch of the trail was nice and dry, thankfully. Trail leveled off a bit. I'm walking through the woods now, through a little open patch of grass in this little field. Cool spot. I have seen now 3 different times so far on this single trail people's names carved onto trees. You know, Jenny loves Billy and Tommy was here. Don't do that. Just don't do that, because you know what? Jenny, Tommy probably doesn't like you, or you're probably not going to like him shortly after.